cracky. Hello, participants. We are here, but we are experiencing slight problem with connectivity. Do bear with us. Hope to start very soon. Thank you. Ajayakumar sir, I hope you can hear me.
Yes. Audio unmuted.
Sir, can you hear me? Sir, sir, I have unmute you, sir.
Okay.
Kelkalo.
Okay.
Sir, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. So shall we start then, sir?
Okay.
Okay. So I'll introduce you. Dear participants, I'm sorry that there was a delay in beginning, but hope things are okay now. Let me present Dr. PP Ajayakumar. He is the Pro Vice Chancellor of the University of Kerala. He was and he still is a professor of English in the School of Distance Education, University of Kerala. And he is an expert in cultural studies, theory, Dalit studies, and many other areas. He's a very versatile person. He's an excellent painter, and he is the chief editor of the Littcrit journal. So I thank Sir for offering us this platform to conduct the program, because this is a Littcrit platform, and also for agreeing to make the presentation. I invite Dr. PP Ajayakumar, sir, to make the presentation on cultural theory. Sir.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So we all know that this is jointly organized by Littcrit and School of Distance Education. and majority of the participants are students or former students of distance education. And my presentation is titled as Why Cultural Theory? And the question in the title itself is indicative of the nature of cultural theory, because cultural theory is also a kind of questioning. It questions the social system, accepted belief systems, and the hegemonic structures of the society. So questioning is basic to cultural theory. So the question in the title certainly indicates the nature of the cultural theories that is going to be introduced. So let me present my PPT. Actually, can you hear me now?
Sir, we can hear you. You're audible, sir.
Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Not yet.
Oh. I think there is some problem connecting with the PowerPoint.
Sujit, sir.
So I can, I think, present without the PowerPoint, or shall I continue? I think it is visible now. Is it visible, the PowerPoint?
It is visible, sir. It is visible.
Okay, okay. So let us begin with the question, why cultural studies? As I already stated, cultural studies is a kind of an approach, a new kind of perspective that has been introduced in 1960s in England. And it is considered to be a collective term for very different and contentious intellectual endeavors. Unlike many other movements and isms that came into being in the past, like, for example, feminism, Marxism, structuralism, or many other movements and intellectual movements and political movements that came in the past, cultural studies is a kind of a collective term. And under cultural studies, or under the banner of cultural studies, there were several different, very diverse, and sometimes even contradictory movements, contradictory ideas. And all these are joined together under the umbrella of cultural studies. So that is the nature of cultural studies. It is not a particular movement. It is a combination of diverse movements that belongs to very different political, social, and cultural milieu. But even then, cultural studies is considered to be a particular movement with certain particular aims and objectives. So while we cannot consider it as a discipline, we can say that it is a movement with a purpose. I told you it was originated in 1964 with the beginning of the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies at Birmingham University in UK. 1964 is the year in which the center was started, but the movement actually started even before. And we know that culture has been a topic of discussion from the very beginning of philosophy itself, because Socrates is considered to be a philosopher who interpreted life, society, politics, and culture. So culture is not something new. It was part of discussions related to literature, philosophy, sociology, and many other disciplines. So we cannot say that culture and the discussion on culture started with cultural studies. It started quite much earlier, whereas cultural studies brought about a transition, a change in the way in which culture is being discussed or culture is being approached. And so cultural studies is commonly defined as an interdisciplinary field with totally different opposing disciplines under it, and using these different disciplines selectively to examine the relations of culture and power. So what is important in cultural studies, and it is different from the earlier discussions on cultural studies in one way, and that is the kind of connection that cultural studies establishes between culture and power. Culture and power. Hope you are aware of the concept of power. Power is certainly a kind of concept that refers to something that controls everything, that controls everybody. It is not just the government. It is not just the ruling class. Power is a wider concept that refers to the controlling entity, which is beyond the government, which is beyond the military, which is beyond the various institutions connected with the government, etc. So the connection between culture and power has been established by cultural studies. That is how it differentiates itself from the previous studies on culture. But it is a fact that at least Marxism has identified the connection between culture and power to a certain extent. You may be remembered of the metaphor that Marx used to refer to culture. He referred it as the superstructure. And at the same time, he established the connection between the foundation and superstructure. He said that the foundation is economy, the economic foundation, and the superstructure is culture. So art, religion, literature, everything comes under the superstructure. So Marx, to a certain extent, connected culture with the economy, the social relations in a particular social system. But here, culture studies tries to connect it with power. Power is a concept that was developed later, after Marx. And in order to examine the relations of culture and power, culture studies tries to use different disciplines. Different disciplines. What are the different disciplines? It can be a kind of linguistic approach, sometimes it will be a feminist approach, sometimes it will be a philosophical approach, or certain other times it will be deconstruction or post-structuralism, sometimes Marxism, phenomenology. So widely different disciplines, ideas from widely different disciplines were selectively used in examining the relations of culture and power. So what is basic to it is the relation between culture and power. And that relation, and that has been established by culture studies, differentiates it from other studies on culture that appeared before the emergence of culture studies, that is 1964. And then they also have a very different kind of understanding of culture, because usually we consider culture as something that is related to certain particular events in life. For example, a festival is considered to be part of our culture. An art form like Kathakali, for example, is considered to be part of our culture. Music is considered to be part of our culture. Literature is considered to be part of our culture. So we have already developed an idea of culture, but culture in culture studies is different from the traditional idea of culture. In culture studies, according to Stuart Hall, we can include all kinds of practices connected with life, all practices. It can be our dress, the way we dress, the way we eat, the food system that we use, the way we behave with others, the way we arrange programs, our religious practices, and our belief systems, and even the way we communicate with others, the way we mingle with others, various educational practices that are part of our culture, part of our life, everything and anything and everything, all kinds of practices can be brought under the term culture. So culture is not just certain selected events that is part of our life. It can be anything and everything, all kinds of practices. Then all representations meaning all kinds of representations. Our national flag is a kind of a representation of our nation. It represents our nation. Our national anthem represents our nation. A red light on the road represents a particular idea, like stop. The green light represents a particular idea, that is go. So these are all different kinds of representations. All these come under culture. Various representations. Language and expressions, and the way in which language expresses our ideas, language defines our life, defines ourselves, everything comes under culture. And customs, all our customs, religious rites, or the various rites that we follow as part of our custom, that also come under culture. So culture has become a wider term under cultural studies. It is not just a limited group of events, but all practices, all representations, all images, all languages, all customs can be brought under cultural studies. And then more than that, our common sense, Stuart Hall refers to the idea of common sense. That is, common sense is also part of culture. What is common sense then? Common sense is an idea that refers to our common or accepted belief systems, accepted things that we accept without any questioning. That is common sense. That is part of culture. For example, we believe that women are supposed to cook in the kitchen. That is a belief, that is a practice. That is part of our common sense. And when we speak, when we make comments, when we produce an advertisement, or when we make a film, in all these things, you find that this common sense works. For example, if you take a film like Talayana Mandram, we find that in that a woman is presented as somebody who is less intelligent than man. And when the character of Srinivasan finally is giving a slap on the face of the female character, she succumbs to his ideas. And we find that she is presented as a person who is less intelligent, who is not intelligent enough to understand several things in life. And that is part of our common sense, a commonsensical understanding. So the word common sense is used here in a very different way. That is why I explained the idea. It is not the ordinary kind of common sense that we speak about. Common sense is the shared beliefs that we accept without any kind of questioning. We accept it blindly as it is. So that is culture studies according to Stuart Hall. And another important idea that has to be understood in the beginning is its relation to politics. Because I told you culture is connected with power by the culture studies theorists. And here we find that culture studies is not just related to power, it is political. It is political because there is a term called cultural politics. Culture studies theorists tries to explore the representations of the marginal groups in the society, and they try to argue that our knowledge is not neutral, it is not innocent. What do you mean by marginal groups? The kind of or a set of people or the group of people who are being marginalized in a society. In the American society, the blacks are supposed to be marginalized. In the Indian society, the Dalits are marginalized sections. So in various societies, there are certain marginalized sections. And cultural studies always tries to stand for the marginalized section. They argue for the marginalized section. Women are actually the marginal sections in most nations all over the world, because in the 19th century, up to 19th century, women never had any voting rights. Women were not allowed to study in schools. So they didn't have the rights that were enjoyed by men. So they can be treated as a marginalized section. So cultural studies always tries to stand for the marginalized section. They fight for the marginalized section. That is the politics of cultural studies. They are always with the underdogs. They always fight for the underdogs. And they try to produce theoretical knowledge in favor of the marginalized, and that is considered by them as political practice. So the politics that the cultural studies theorists enjoy is connected with the marginalized section in every society, and they enter into the production of theoretical knowledge and they treat it as a kind of political practice. And they believe that knowledge is never neutral. Knowledge is always political. And the kind of knowledge that cultural studies theorists produce, that is also not neutral. They take a stand, they take a position. And what is the position? The position is with the downtrodden. And that is a political position. And they try to explain that this is the kind of political position that we wanted to take. And then another thing is that culture is, or cultural studies focuses on the signifying practices in our society, or that is part of our culture. I told you before that we share several things in our society, several belief systems, several meanings. That is another word that is used to refer to that. Meanings. What are meanings? We give a particular meaning to a particular object or a particular concept. For example, one particular meaning that I can cite as an example is that fair is beautiful. White color is often connected with beauty, and black color is often connected with ugliness. So various instances can be cited. You can remember the poem by Spencer, Prothalamion. In Prothalamion, he refers to the swans, and the swans are described as the fairest swans in the world. And the fairness of the swans is related to purity, their beauty, their heavenly nature, their godly nature, etc. So the fair color, the white color, is often connected with all the positive things in this world. Whereas the dark color, you may be remembered of the title of a novel, The Heart of Darkness. So dark color is connected with all kinds of devilishness, evil, ugliness, etc. So what is this? This is a particular kind of meaning produced in a particular kind of society. And how this meaning came into being? This meaning came into being because the force, the kind of power that rules, that controls meaning, prefers the white color over the black. And that is why. So meaning is used in a very different sense here. So we have several similar shared social meanings. And the meanings are generated through signs. So the swans that we see in Prothalamion is a particular sign. And through that sign, that meaning is generated. When he says that these fair swans are heavenly creatures, he generates a meaning that it is connected with all kinds of holiness, all kinds of godliness, heavenliness, etc. And then we find that it is language that gives meaning to these objects. These objects get meaning through language. It is done through language. And then cultural studies actually uses these images and these signifying practices to explore the meaning that is symbolically produced. And the theorists analyze these meanings. They identify that there is a prejudice behind this kind of a meaning. For example, you find this picture of Onam. It is part of Onam celebration. So it presents a particular kind of meaning. This picture is a symbol, a sign, we can say. It is a sign of Onam festival, which is celebrated as a very happy kind of an event. But if you analyze this from the cultural studies point of view, you find that Onam actually is an event, a cultural event, we can say, that is related to a very unhappy event. And why it is unhappy event? Because it refers to an event in which a ruler who was actually one of the best rulers according to that legend in the world, one of the rulers who was loved by everybody, one of the rulers who established a kind of heavenly, if we can use that term, heavenly society, he was brutally thrown out of power. And that person is given a kind of a reward or a kind of a slight, uh, a kind of varam that is he can come every year once to this country. So actually that event is a very brutal event, a kind of event which is very much against all kinds of that means ethical practices, but we celebrate Onam in a very happy mood, forgetting about the kind of story or behaving as if we don't have any idea about that story behind it, or interpreting that story in a different way, and forgetting about the real events that are behind the Onam. So here, cultural studies can explore this mythical story, the symbolic event, in a very different way, looking from the point of view of Mahabali, not from the point of view of Vamana. We, or the legend, generally looks from the point of view of Vamana, not Mahabali. So cultural studies tries to follow a kind of approach which favors Mahabali, not Vamana. That is the point of view of cultural studies. So it tries to analyze all kinds of signifying practices like this. Onam is just an example, all kinds of signifying practices. And then, when we come back to the earlier question, who is creating meaning? I told you about the white and the black. Who is controlling the meaning? Take, for example, Shakespeare. We are all familiar with Shakespeare. We study Shakespeare. And Dr. Ajayakumar once said that India is a country where English literature is learned by the maximum number of students. If you take the number of students who join for MA English literature in England, it will be very, very low when compared with the number of students who join for English literature in India. And why is that? And why we consider Shakespeare as the greatest writer? Is it because Shakespeare is the greatest writer or because of some other reason? We know that Shakespeare and English literature was introduced in India as part of a colonial agenda to subjugate the colonized, to overpower the colonized. We may not understand it. Still, we consider Shakespeare as the greatest writer. I think it was somewhere around 1989 that Shakespeare was removed from the syllabus of MA English in University of Kerala when Dr. Ajayakumar was the chairman of Board of Studies. He removed the paper, the special paper Shakespeare, and it included him as one of the authors in the paper Chaucer to 1800. But the very next year, Shakespeare was reinstated. Shakespeare's paper was reinstated. And that is the kind of reverence that we have towards Shakespeare, the blind reverence. We think that Shakespeare is everything, is the greatest writer. How this kind of an image was created? It was created consciously, very consciously by the colonialists. Why? The colonialists wanted something and somebody to show their dominance or establish their dominance, psychological dominance over the colonized. And the best thing that they could use was English literature and Shakespeare. And Terry Eagleton refers to this idea in one of his articles, The Rise of English. Why and how English literature became so popular in the colonies? Because it was used as a tool to dominate over the colonized. So what I'm trying to say is that Shakespeare became such an important, influential figure among Indians, among all colonized people, because the meaning at that time, the power at that time was with the colonized. Sorry, it was with the colonial England. It was with the power was with the colonial government. They were creating this meaning that Shakespeare is the greatest writer, English is the greatest language, and everything. So we find that the non-elite views were put down. We have Kalidasa, we have many other writers in India. India has a longer history of literature than England. You know that, I don't know whether you know that English literature was offered in British universities around 1824 and 34, and that too in one or two universities. Only in the 19th century, English literature was offered as a branch of study. And at the same time, it was offered in India also. Whereas India has got a very long history of literature, a very long, rich history of literature. But still, we consider Shakespeare as the greatest writer because we are still controlled by the meaning that was created by the colonial power. And cultural studies tries to explore the meanings thus produced symbolically in language. These kinds of meanings were analyzed by cultural studies, and they expose how meaningless these meanings are. This is only an example. There are several other things that we can discuss in relation to that. Another idea that we have to discuss in connection with cultural studies is representation. What is representation? We know that there are several things that represent various ideas. That is, idea is something that does not have a body, that does not have a physical, concrete body, but ideas are represented by certain objects. For example, look at the picture. This is Bharat Mata. Bharat Mata is a representation of Bharat, the nation. So it is an image that represents the nation. The flag in the hands of Bharat Mata is the flag, tricolor flag that represents the nation. So images represent ideas. Images represents thoughts. Or on certain other occasions, objects represents ideas. For example, a statue of Mahatma Gandhi represents a kind of a political idea, a kind of a worldview called Gandhism. So objects represents an idea, or an image represents an idea, or sometimes a book represents an idea. Certain inscriptions represent an idea, certain sounds represent an idea. So representation is part of our culture. In everything, in almost everything, we find different kinds of representations. And these representations are socially constructed, says the theorist. Socially constructed. Look at this picture. Who says that this is Bharat Mata? How can you say that this is Bharat Mata? Do you think that all women living in India are like this woman? Or who says that Bharat Mata is fair in color? Majority of the Indian women are black in color, but Bharat Mata is extremely fair. How is that possible? So does this Bharat Mata represent the country as a whole? Because India as a country has very different kinds of people believing in different religions, belonging to different races. People of Sikkim or Northeast are totally different from the other people that you find in North India. People in the South are different from the people in the North. This woman looks like a North Indian woman. So if you look at this picture, you may think that India is represented by North India. And an upper class woman belonging to North India represents India. Is it a proper representation? But we find that there are many such representations which are socially accepted, shared by all the people without any kind of questioning. We do not question it. We accept it blindly, thinking that this is what is part of our accepted wisdom. So cultural representations are made through a kind of consent by the society. And people, ordinary people especially, accepts these representations blindly as if that is part of our culture, part of our way of life, part of our society, etc. And there are many such representations that actually is designed and controlled knowingly or unknowingly by the elite in a society, the ruling power in a society. When I say ruling power, that does not mean the particular government or the particular institution that supports the government. Power is a term that has a wider meaning. Power is something that is beyond the government, that controls everything. It is a kind of an ideology that controls everything beyond the government. So many such representations. Culture studies refers to or tries to analyze these representations and unearths many different meanings and tries to challenge these representations. And then materialism is another important idea connected with cultural studies, because they believe that culture is not just an idea. It is not something that is that do not have a material body, because culture is something that is produced, and it is produced through a kind of a mechanism. It is produced and distributed, because we find that in cultural productions are not, they do not remain just as an idea, but there is a kind of material activity of production and distribution. For example, a film is produced, film is part of culture, and film is produced and distributed. We can say that film is a kind of a cultural production that helps in continuing the existing social system, the capitalist system, you can say. It tries to speak about, or it tries to repeat the accepted ideas about the family, about the role of woman in a family, the role of man in a family and outside the family, about different sections in the society, etc. We find that most often the hero of the film will be very fair, and the villain in the film will be very dark, and that is the usual pattern. There may be certain exceptions. For example, there is a story that comes in Manorama. I don't know whether it is now. The magician, the mandrake. If you have read that story, that is serialized on Sundays or on all other, I think it is now in all other days, from Monday to Saturday. Magician Mandrake, where Mandrake is a fair European, whereas there is another person, Lothar. Lothar is a black. And throughout the story, you find that Mandrake is the person who takes intelligent decisions, whereas Lothar is the person who uses his power, muscle power. He doesn't have intelligence. That is how Lothar is represented as a person with muscle power, with less intelligence. Mandrake is acting using his intelligence. And so that indirectly gives us an impression that the white European is more intelligent, whereas the black American or black African is less intelligent. He has muscle power but no intelligence. That is a kind of image that it creates. So we find that material production, culture is produced and distributed. And under cultural studies, you find several kinds of different approaches. The class approach, which speaks about the working class and the capitalist. The gender approach, which differentiates the male and the female. The caste approach, which speaks about the upper caste and lower caste. Sexuality, there is different sexualities. The the kind of that means lesbians and other sexualities. Race, different races. Ethnicity, different ethnic groups. Nations, people belonging to different nations. All these approaches are used in culture studies. But at the same time, culture studies doesn't reduce interpretation to any of these, because a gender approach has its merits. At the same time, it has its defects as well, because a gender approach speaks about woman or male and female, masculine and feminine genders, and how the feminine is subordinated by the masculine gender, the man subordinating woman. That is what feminists argue. But cultural studies approach is different from that. While using the gender approach and fighting for the female or the women, feminine gender, at the same time, it uses various other ideas connected with class, ethnicity, etc., also in the study of gender. Because you find that women is not a single kind of entity. There is black women, white women, upper caste women, lower caste women. So women of different types are there. And how the gender approach, how can a gender approach look at these differences among women? So we cannot say a woman, there are different types of women, not a particular type of woman, different types of women. So everything is like that. So cultural studies tries to view it from a different angle, incorporating wide variety of ideas from other disciplines as well. Then power is, as I said before, is one of the important terms that you should know in connection with the culture studies. I told you power is not just the government or the military or the police, etc. Power is an idea that is beyond all these things. It refers to a kind of force that controls everything. So power is present in everything, all kinds of social relationships, within the family, outside the family, within the institution, outside the institution. Everywhere you can see power. It is part of every kind of social relationship between man and woman, between husband and wife, between father and children, between a superior officer and a lower officer, between the white people and the black people. Everywhere there is power. And what is power? It is not just something that connects the society together, but we find that power is something that subordinates certain groups for certain other groups. Power is with the hands of certain particular group in a society. In every society, there is a particular group that holds power. It is not a particular political party. It is not a set of people, but it is a kind of a group, a kind of an ideology that controls the meanings in that society. For example, in a country like India, you find that it is the upper class urban people or the group that controls the power in India, because we find that majority of the decisions of any government, for that matter, every government is in favor of the upper class urban group. And you might have heard of the Narmada Valley issue. What is that issue? We find that the problem of water scarcity in the cities of Gujarat is certainly, it was a particular issue. And they wanted to build a dam in the Narmada River and bring water to the cities. But in that process, what happens is that thousands of people have lost their agriculture, their fields, their places, their houses, etc. So here, the priority is given to the people in the city and not to the poor villagers who lose their houses, lands, cultivable lands, etc. And that is power. So power has certain kinds of prejudices. It has certain kinds of, that means a kind of love for, affection for certain particular groups that controls it. So in every community, in every society, there is a particular group that controls power, and there is a group which is subordinated. For example, the Red Indians of America, Canada, etc. You might have heard several stories, several truths, facts about these Red Indians. Actually, America, the whole of America belonged to these Red Indians, but the Europeans migrated to these areas and they established their power, killing majority of the Red Indians and removing them to the forest. So we find that that is the sign of power, because the Red Indians who occupied the territory were removed and annihilated to a great extent, physically annihilated by another group who had power in their hands. So power is another important thing. And popular culture is something that never was connected with culture, because culture was, in the traditional sense, connected with the elite culture. Because we always humorously say that mimicry is the most popular art form of Kerala. A lot of people watch mimicry, but we never consider mimicry as the most representative art form of Kerala. We often consider Kathakali as the most representative art form of Kerala. Whoever you ask, they will say that Kathakali is the most representative art form of Kerala. And the non-Keralites also believe that that is the most representative art form. But what is the actual fact? The fact is that very few people in Kerala watch Kathakali, whereas majority of the people watch mimicry, pulikali, and many other art forms. So why is this? Why it is not considered seriously? Because popular culture is considered to be silly. It is considered to be subordinate. It is considered to be of less importance. So the very fact that it is popular makes it insignificant, unimportant. At one time, Changambuzha was a poet whose poems were sold in huge numbers. It is usually said that they were sold like oranges, because It was very simple, very melodious, musical, and very interesting for the people to read. But at that time, critics used to argue that Tangambura's poems are very, very, very low level poetry, popular poetry. So whatever is popular is considered to be worthless. That is a kind of idea. But cultural studies takes popular culture as very important, very meaningful, and very significant. And we find that cultural studies tries to analyze popular culture. Look at the kind of advertisement that is shown here. In the advertisement, you find a woman and a girl, a small girl, maybe the mother and her daughter, standing with a washing machine. So this apparently this advertisement is a very, 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 very general one. Everybody will accept this. What is wrong with this advertisement? But if you look at it closely from a cultural studies point of view, you find that this picture creates a kind of consent, a kind of meaning. What is the meaning that it creates? The meaning that it creates is that washing is actually the domain of women. Washing is the domain of women. Women are supposed to wash clothes. They are supposed to do the domestic jobs. So this particular advertisement indirectly creates the impression and generalizes the idea and produce the meaning that women are supposed to wash and do the domestic jobs. So popular culture, like advertisement, is a popular part of popular culture. Popular culture is extremely important in understanding the socially shared meanings that is part of our culture. And there are certain terms like ideology and hegemony used by cultural studies theorists connected with that. What is ideology? Ideology is a concept that is developed by Althusser, a Marxist thinker, and according to him, ideology is something that is controlling our understanding about ourselves, our understanding about the world. How do we understand the world? How do we know that we are a particular kind of individual living in this world? Because how do I know that I am a Hindu or I am a Muslim or I am a Christian? How do I know? It is ideology that tells you that you belong to such and such community. It is ideology that tells you that you are an Indian, you belong to India. It is ideology that tells you that you are black or you are white. So ideology is a concept which tries to describe a kind of power that makes us understand everything about ourselves. It is not something that is connected with an idea. It is not idea, but it is a power that controls our understandings about ourselves, about the world. Hegemony is another concept developed by another thinker, Antonio Gramsci. And hegemony refers to the dominance of a particular group in a society. He says that, Gramsci says that in every society, there is a particular group that controls everything. And that is the hegemonic group in that society. And Althusser also refers to ideological state apparatus and repressive state apparatus. Althusser says that we are controlled by two different apparatuses in every society. One is the repressive state apparatus, that is the military, the police, the court, the repressive state apparatus, which controls us forcefully. And that is very evident. We can see the policemen and the repressive state apparatus, agents of repressive state apparatus. There is another apparatus called ideological state apparatus, and that is invisible. We don't see it. It is controlling us, even though it is invisible. For example, education is part of ideological state apparatus. Because through education, we are being conditioned and controlled. Religion is another ideological state apparatus. It is conditioning us, controlling us. It is telling us how we should behave, how we should act, and it instructs us several things about our life, about our society, about our position in this world, etc. So we find that it is these ideological state apparatuses, the films, the advertisements, everything, literature, everything is part of this ideological state apparatus. It is that produces the general consent that we find in the society. And what is the consent? Consent is the kind of way in which we accept the so-called social norms. Social norms. There are several things which is known as the social norms. We accept it as part of the consent. A consent is created and we accept all these things as part of our life blindly without questioning. And then we find cultural studies theorists reading texts. And what are texts? Texts, usually we understand text as a book. A book is usually termed as a text. But according to cultural theorists, a text is not just a book. Anything can be a text. A particular advertisement that we have seen earlier is a text. A particular painting that we see here in the slide, that is a text. A novel is a text. An event, a particular event is a text. So anything and everything is considered as a text by cultural studies theorists. And why it is a text? Because every text produces meanings. It produces meaning. A text produces meaning. And every text is a sign also. A painting is a sign. A painting is a sign. And just like a written word, all these are producing meaning. It is not just the word that produces meaning. Every text, a painting, a film, an advertisement, a particular event, a particular music, a particular light, a color, everything produces meaning. On the road, you see that it is a green color that produces a particular meaning. You go. Red color produces a meaning. Stop. So texts produce meaning. We have to read texts. And another fact that is important is that these texts have different meanings. Meaning is not a single one. There are different meanings, multiple meanings for every text. There is not one particular meaning. It has multiple meanings. Look at this painting. This painting has a particular meaning. What is that meaning? This is the painting of Saraswati done by Raja Devivarma. So Devivarma conceives Saraswati in this particular form, wearing a sari and blouse and all these things, sitting on a rock. I think nobody in any part of the world has seen Saraswati in this form before Devivarma painted it. Because if you look at the sculptures of Saraswati in various temples, you find that Saraswati in those temples, you find Saraswati in a totally different form. There is no sari, and her appearance is also different. But here, Saraswati is conceived as a woman wearing sari, and it is often said that it is Ravi Verma who popularized sari in India. It is through his pictures, paintings, that sari became a popular kind of dress form. So this is the way in which Ravi Verma visualized Saraswati. This is an image, and this image became popular. And this popular image created an image of a goddess, and people began to believe that this is the picture of Saraswati. This is how Saraswati looks. This is how Saraswati looks. And Saraswati appears like an upper class woman, North Indian woman, and that is how Ravi Verma visualized her. But this picture can be read in different ways. We can try to think that Ravi Verma is, to a certain extent, presenting Saraswati as an upper class woman, and Saraswati belongs to an upper class community, etc. Anyway, there can be innumerable interpretations connected with this. And look at the different picture of Ravana. What about Ravana? Ravana is visualized as a black man. And we don't know whether Ravana was black. And according to the legend, Ravana had 10 heads, but here there is only one head. But it is true that the kind of metaphorical expression of 10 heads, a man with 10 heads, is indicative of the idea that he is so intelligent, extremely intelligent. And here, the question of identity and subjectivity is also important in cultural studies. Because we can ask a question, how are we produced? How do you understand myself? Who am I? And my description about myself is conditioned by the accepted ideas in that society. I say that I am black, or I am white, I am female, or I am a male, because these differences are actually shared ideas that we believe in a particular society. There is a belief that, or there was a belief that women should wear a particular kind of dress and men should wear a different type of dress. But now we find that several women are wearing the dress that men used to wear now. So that the difference is changing. Difference is, I think, minimal now. Why is this? If it was a real kind of an idea that women should wear this particular kind of dress, there would not be any change in the dress. But the fact that the dress patterns are changing, that shows that it is not essential. These identities are not essential. There is no real identity as a woman, or as a man, or as a black man and a white man. These are not essential identities. They are constructed identities. They are constructed identities. The differences are constructed. Earlier, women do not drive cars. They do not drive scooters or bikes, but now women drive everything, even aeroplane. Why is this difference? Because the earlier concept is slowly undergoing changes. So the essence, the kind of essence that was part of the concept of a woman is changing, or a kind of essence was not really there. Woman is not woman, actually. Woman is a constructed idea. So the idea of a woman that we have in our mind is a constructed idea. You might have heard several dialogues in Malayalam movies by Suresh Gopi or Mammootty speaking against women. You are just a woman, Mammootty says in one film, I think The King. You are just a woman. So that shows that a woman is not supposed to speak arrogantly, speak boldly. A woman is not supposed to act courageously, etc. So that was the kind of essentialist idea connected with the woman. But that has changed, or slowly changing. So we find that the kind of ideas or essential ideas or identities, subjectivities that are connected with an individual or an object is not something that is actually there, but it is a constructed idea. So the image of Ravana that you find in this painting is a constructed idea. Ravana may be a very nice person because he never did anything against Sita. He was actually taking revenge on what Rama and Lakshmana has done against his sister, and he abducted Sita. But we find that After reaching Lanka also, Sita was kept very in a kind of situation where she was extremely safe and she was under the custody of several women. So we find that Ravana may not be the kind of person that we have in our mind, or the image of Ravana was created or constructed by people who follow or who oppose Rama. Sorry, who oppose Ravana, who follow Rama. And that may be why Ravana got this kind of an image. Anyway, cultural studies is anti-essentialist in character. And then we can, I think, familiarize with some of the theories of cultural studies. Richard Hogarth is the number one because he is the founder of the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. He was an adult education tutor. And he was a person who belongs to the working class and who grew through education. And he believes that the dominant elite gives legitimacy to their cultural forms, cultural struggle. And it is the dominant elite that creates meaning in a society, in every society. They create meaning, they have control over meaning. What is good is decided by them, what is bad is decided by them. So the idea of what is good, what is acceptable is decided by the elite. Another theorist is Raymond Williams, professor of Oxford for a very long time. And it was he who developed the idea of culture from a traditional, different from a traditional point of view. He believed that culture is all inclusive, a whole way of life. The material, intellectual, spiritual, everything is part of culture. And he believed that the idea of considering certain things as good and acceptable and certain other things as bad and unacceptable is not innocent. It is not an innocent exercise. It is very much connected with the existing dominant ideology, the ideology of those who are in power. And then Stuart Hall is another very important person who was also the director of Contemporary Center for Contemporary Culture Studies from 1968 to 79. He was a West Indian born British thinker, and he was associated with the New Left. And it was he who developed the theory further using the concepts of hegemony, ideology, and post-structuralism, deconstruction, etc. And then, if you look at the cultural studies practices, various kinds of interpretations of cultural studies theories, we find that they always consider language as the center. Language is at the center of cultural studies practices because language is considered to be, or they consider language as a system, a thing. What is the nature of a thing? A thing never changes. It is static. And some of these cultural studies theorists consider language as such a system that is static, stagnant, remaining stagnant for a long period of time. But the fact is that life is something that changes every time. Language is also something that changes with history, with time. It is often said that time is like a river because time is always moving. A river is always flowing. So it is like a river. Language is also like that. Language is always changing. It is moving. So the idea of a particular word at a particular historical situation will be different from the idea of that word in a different historical situation. So we find that when you interpret using language, using images of language, or even visual images, we find that we should also consider the historical background in which it is created. So historicizing is important in interpretation. But most often, or on certain occasions, we find that cultural studies theorists do not consider history as important. And that is one of the defects of certain theories of cultural studies. For example, look at this painting. This is again a painting of Devi Verma. And in this painting, you find a woman, a Nair woman, standing within the house with a child. And the title is Come Papa. They are waiting for the Papa, father. So this can be interpreted as a woman, as a condition of a woman in those days, whereas women are supposed to stay inside the house, waiting for the husband. And that is one interpretation. You can say that this is a feminist interpretation will say that this is the condition of women. Women are suppressed. They are not allowed to go out of the house, etc. But another interpretation that came, interesting interpretation, is that a woman in those times, especially a Nair woman, is the dominant in the pair, the husband and wife, because the Nair woman is having the key with her. She has the control with her. She has the control. And the man is only a person who comes in the evening and leaves. So during the time of Marimakatayam, we find that it is the woman who is powerful, who heads the family, and the man is only just a visitor. Even Ravi Verma was like that. There are a lot of stories about that. Anyway, we find that this picture can be interpreted differently if you consider the historical background of this picture, the kind of condition of that particular period, and the condition of the Nair women and the Tharwad at that time. So, culture studies has to be, or practices of culture studies has to be done considering the historical background. If you do it mechanically, you will arrive at wrong conclusion. And so similar is the case of reductionism in culture studies. Culture studies says that everything is possible, or they say that you cannot approach a problem from just a gender perspective, or a kind of Marxist perspective, or a kind of feminist perspective, or a particular perspective. So culture studies wanted all these perspectives or ideas from all different perspectives put together, or selected perspectives put together. But when we look at culture studies, we find that what culture studies does is that they limit the analysis to culture alone. Can we believe that culture is independent from politics, from history, from sociology, etc.? It is true that cultural studies practitioners refer to political ideas, historical ideas, social ideas, etc. But when they study the behavior of the spectators of a particular documentary or a serial Ramayana was a popular serial. You analyze the behavior of the people who watch Ramayana. How can you analyze? If you are a sociologist, you will analyze this by preparing a questionnaire, circulating it among the spectators, and getting the feedback, analyzing it, etc. But among cultural studies theorists, we find that they approach this problem in a different way. They do not conduct a survey. They do not try to understand what the response of the people actually are. They visualize certain things. That is, they make a qualitative analysis rather than a quantitative analysis. How far this is good? Isn't it a kind of reductionism? That is the question that some of the critics of culture studies tries to ask. So there are critics who believe that cultural studies also is a kind of practicing a kind of reductionism, because it does not consider the economy, the sociology, and the history as important. They do not take into consideration the quantitative data which is extremely important for analysis. They take into consideration only the qualitative data, qualitative data. And what are the methodologies of cultural studies? We find ethnography, culturalist approaches, textual approaches, semiotical approaches, post-structuralist approaches, deconstruction. Deconstruction, post-structuralism, semiotics are all textual approaches. Reception studies is another approach, reception theory. Ethnography is another kind of approach. These are the three important kinds of approaches, methodologies of analysis that cultural studies theories use. And ethnography, you find that under ethnography, you find that they try to analyze experiences, considering, for example, the experience of the First Nations of Canada, and that is part of ethnography. Their experience is analyzed standing from the position of the First Nations, the tribals of Canada, or whether it is the tribals of India. Culture studies theorist looks at the issue from the point of view of the tribals. In textual approaches, they use post-structuralism, deconstruction, etc., where they tries to argue that no meaning is complete. Meaning is subject to change. And reception theories is also used, especially in the study of television, serials, films, and ads, etc. So these are the kinds of methodologies that they adopt. So one thing that I would like to share with you is that culture studies is a kind of an umbrella term, an interdisciplinary field, which has innumerable kinds of approaches, and they can be selected and used in different kinds of studies. If 1,000 people speak about culture studies, it will be 1,000 different ways of presenting culture studies, because culture studies is never the same, it is different. It is this multiplicity, and that is the beauty of culture studies. And culture studies theorists accept and approve, they hail, they project this multiplicity, because it should be multiple, it should not be the same, because culture is multiple, life is multiple. But at the same time, cultural studies theorists tries to stand in favor of the marginalized, the oppressed, the downtrodden, and the people who are actually oppressed by the elite, by the power structure in every society. And that is the approach of cultural studies. But when we say that it was started in 1964, and so far, has there been any social change as a result of culture studies or active involvement of culture studies? We don't know. There was no revolution created by culture studies. But at the same time, it has succeeded in involving itself, intervening itself in several discourses connected with culture, politics, and issues connected with women, the tribals, and the blacks, etc. So through such discourses, we find that it creates a kind of awareness among people, and it finally results in a kind of social transformation. Such a kind of transformation certainly is possible in culture studies, or that may be the kind of after effect of output of culture studies that we can see. But truly speaking, we don't know whether there was any kind of social change as such as a result of culture studies, even though that is the aim, one of the aims of cultural studies. Anyway, this is only another kind of introduction to cultural studies. Hope you got some idea about cultural studies. So thank you very much for arranging this kind of an opportunity for sharing my views with our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. There are a couple of questions. Can we take them?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. One question is, is historicizing important in studying contemporary retellings of ancient myths and folk tales?
Can you repeat the question?
Is historicizing important in studying contemporary retellings of ancient myths and folk tales?
I think that is a good question. But when we speak about folk tales, we find that folk tales are not historical in the real sense of the term. When we say history or historical, history should have certain evidence. It is connected with certain known facts, facts that are known to us. But folk tales are not tales that are actually historical in the real sense of the term. And they are not known to us. They just remain as tales. So I don't think a historical analysis is possible in the case of folk tales. But at the same time, we can say that the images and the ideas that are represented in the folk tales can be subjected to analysis. That is what we did in the case of Onam. Onam, or the tale of Mahabali, has several images in it. The image of Rakshasa and the image of Deva, the image of unity and the kind of prosperity, and all these things are there in that tale. And these images can be used for the analysis. It is not historical in the real sense of the term, but at the same time, the analysis is possible. A kind of qualitative analysis is possible in the case of folk tales, and that will be really interesting. And we can generate different types of meanings, different meanings out of such analysis.
Thank you very much, Savi. I think we'll take one more question and conclude. How cultural studies reflect in poetics and politics of contemporary popular fiction? How cultural studies reflect in poetics and politics of contemporary popular fiction, especially myth recreations?
Okay. There are a lot of such novels emerging now. I think there is a novel by, I think, Neelakantan. I don't remember his full name. There is one popular novelist. He wrote a novel about Ravana. And that novel was trying to recreate the image of Ravana in a different way. And that kind of a popular novel tries to argue against the accepted image of Ravana, the accepted image of Ravana as a villain, a villainous creature, and a person who is evil, etc., etc. And so such a kind of a novel can be studied and interpreted using cultural studies to argue that the image of Ravana as a villain can be destabilized, can be rewritten, or it can be modified and corrected and transformed by looking at him from a totally different angle. So the novel logically presents how Ravana is a kind of a noble figure, and how the popular image of Ravana can be deconstructed. So such interpretations are certainly good. Moreover, we find that popular fiction is important because it is in popular fiction that we get many characters connected with our shared social understanding of life, because we have several commonsensical understandings of day-to-day experiences in life, and all such images are present in abundance in the popular fiction, in the fiction that we find in Manorama Weekly, Mangalam Weekly, etc. Lot of commonsensical, commonly accepted notions, images are present. So we find that these popular fictions are really good for analyzing from a cultural studies point of view. You can deconstruct those images and you can try to analyze how our shared social meanings, shared social understandings are to a great extent constructions of our own society, constructions of the dominant ideology of our particular society, how we have become slaves to those prejudices created by our society. So the serials are also really good source for cultural studies or cultural analysis for that matter, because the serials also present the popular or the social shared knowledge in abundance. So that is extremely possible, and I think the cultural studies theorists will find it a very good resource for analysis. Yes, any other question?
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. We have one more question is there. Would you like to take it or shall we conclude?
Yes, we can take one more question.
Okay, yeah, that will be the final question. The question is, there are many recent literary works that looks at the history in a humanistic way and creates a different idea about it too. But is it reliable? And does it start for a change in our society and the way people perceive things?
Yes, I think the rewriting of history is important. And rewriting of history happens most often in different forms. And we find that cultural studies at the same time stands for rewriting of history from the perspective of the downtrodden. And if you argue from the point of view of the cultural studies prefers or stand for presentation of history or rewriting of history from the point of view of the downtrodden, not from the powerful, not from those who are on power. So we find that history is being rewritten by those who are in the power and those who fight for the rights of the downtrodden. So cultural studies is always with the downtrodden, writing for the downtrodden, standing for the downtrodden. So when you say that rewriting of history, we find that rewriting is also not very innocent. Rewriting takes positions. So cultural studies always takes the position of the downtrodden.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of the participants, I would like to thank you for spending so much time with us. We know that you're extremely busy with your official duties, particularly in these difficult times in the university, and you have found time to prepare so exhaustively and talk to us on cultural studies. So we are all indebted to you, and we thank you for that. And there are a lot of thanks coming in the chat box. Thank you very much, sir. And we hope there will be more initiatives of this kind from Littcrit, we initiated by you. And thank you all the participants for being with us. And I know it has been difficult for you with the rains and connectivity issues. Thank you again. We'll meet again quite soon with another program organized by Littcrit. Hopefully next on the 13th we are having a program, a talk by Dr. Pramod Nair. It has been initiated by Dr. Ajayakumar, and look forward to meeting you during that event. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you all.